Hollywood has always been brilliant at selling illusions. It sells you the hero, the legend, the icon, a carefully lit image projected onto a silver screen and polished to perfection by publicists and studio machinery. For decades, audiences accepted that image as truth. The golden age of Hollywood was supposed to be exactly that, golden. A time when cinema reached its full artistic power, when larger-than-life stars ruled the cultural imagination, and when American filmmaking stood at the pinnacle of the world. But Ron Howard, one of the most respected directors in the history of cinema, a man who literally grew up inside this industry as a child actor before becoming the filmmaker behind Apollo 13, A Beautiful Mind, and Frost/Nixon, has never been willing to let that illusion go unexamined. Having spent his entire life observing the industry from the inside, Howard has spoken candidly over the years about the darker architecture hidden beneath Hollywood's glamorous surface. He has studied these figures not just as entertainers but as human beings whose private conduct left marks that no amount of studio polish could fully erase. This is his reckoning. 6 actors. 6 stories. 6 hard truths that the Golden Age tried to bury under applause. Before James Bond made the suave action hero an archetype, before a generation of leading men refined the formula, there was Errol Flynn. Born in Tasmania, Australia in 1909, Flynn arrived in Hollywood during the 1930s and became a sensation almost overnight. His 1935 breakthrough in Captain Blood launched a career that made him one of Warner Brothers' most bankable stars. Films like The Adventures of Robin Hood and The Sea Hawk cemented his image as the ideal swashbuckling adventurer, charming, athletic, effortlessly magnetic. Off-screen, the reality was something far more troubling. In September 1942, Flynn met 17-year-old Betty Hansen at a Hollywood party. She had come to Hollywood in search of movie stardom. According to her account, Flynn gave her cocktails and took her upstairs and seduced her. Betty had just turned 17, 6 days earlier, and the age of consent was 18. Her outraged sister contacted the district attorney's office. The DA then recalled a prior complaint from Peggy Satterley, who alleged that in August 1941, when she was 15 years old, Flynn invited her to his boat, spiked her drink with liquor and raped her. The DA charged Flynn with 3 counts of statutory rape, 1 charge for assaulting Hansen and 2 for Satterley. The trial that followed, held in Los Angeles between January and February 1943, focused national attention on Hollywood's sexual mores, which both titillated and shocked many Americans. Fans and sensation seekers thronged Flynn's neighborhood, mobbing the courthouse at his preliminary hearing. When Hollywood's biggest movie star was arrested, he called Hollywood's most successful fix-it attorney, Jerry Giesler, who systematically worked to destroy the credibility of both accusers. The jury returned a not guilty verdict. The acquittal did not end the story. It revealed something deeper about the system that protected him, a system where fame functioned as a kind of legal armor. Ron Howard has spoken about how Flynn's trial represented a turning point in his understanding of Hollywood's moral ecosystem. The studio machinery had worked exactly as designed, shielding a powerful star from accountability while 2 teenage girls were left unprotected and publicly humiliated. The trial served as a historical precedent, analyzing the cultural tolerance of sexual misconduct in wartime America. Flynn died in 1959 at the age of 50, his body worn out by decades of alcohol abuse and reckless living. The phrase, "in like Flynn," had already entered the American language, a casual, breezy tribute to a man whose crimes had been laundered into folklore. Kirk Douglas was, by any measure, one of the most commanding presences in the history of American cinema. Born Isser Danielovich in 1916 to poor Russian immigrant parents in upstate New York, he climbed out of poverty through sheer force of will. His performance in Spartacus made him a global icon. His role in Champion showed audiences a kind of raw, muscular ambition that few actors could match. He was nominated 3 times for the Academy Award and received an honorary Oscar in 1996. But behind that famous cleft chin and those blazing blue eyes, there existed a man whose conduct toward others left deep wounds, and whose most serious allegation would not surface publicly until after his death. In a memoir released in November 2021 called Little Sister, Natalie Wood's younger sister Lana Wood alleged that Kirk Douglas sexually assaulted Natalie in the summer of 1955, when the young actress was a teenager. The alleged assault took place after Lana and their mother dropped Natalie off at the Chateau Marmont in Los Angeles to meet with Douglas. The meeting had been arranged by their mother, who hoped that Douglas could help open doors for the young actress's career. Lana Wood writes that it seemed like a long time passed before Natalie got back into the car. "She looked awful, very disheveled and very upset. Natalie and their mother started urgently whispering to each other. Years later, when Natalie finally told her sister what had happened, she said simply, he hurt me, Lana. Kirk Douglas died in February 2020 at age 103. His son Michael did not respond to requests for comment, but a statement was issued through Michael Douglas's publicist, "May they both rest in peace." Douglas was an admitted philanderer who described himself in his autobiography as a son of a bitch, plain and simple. The silence that protected him was not incidental, it was structural. Natalie Wood and her mother made a calculated decision that speaking out would destroy Natalie's career rather than Douglas's. The power imbalance was total. Decades of silence followed, the allegation buried under layer upon layer of Hollywood mythology. Ron Howard has reflected on Douglas as a figure who embodies the way that talent and power were allowed to operate without accountability. A man who lived to 103 and received standing ovations while those he harmed lived quietly with what he had done. Not all of Hollywood's darkness came wrapped in violence. Some of it came wrapped in fur coats and imperious demands and a cruelty that ground people down through humiliation rather than force. Fay Dunaway, born in 1941 in Bascom, Florida, was one of the most genuinely brilliant actresses of her generation. Her performances in Bonnie and Clyde in 1967 and Chinatown in 1974 were not just good, they were transformative, helping define what screen acting could look like when it operated at its highest level. In 1977, she won the Academy Award for Best Actress for Network. But the stories that followed her from set to set throughout her career described someone whose treatment of colleagues and crew members went far beyond demanding professionalism into something more troubling. On the set of Mommy Dearest, the 1981 film in which she played Joan Crawford, a woman historically associated with domestic cruelty, reports emerged that Dunaway's behavior mirrored, in disturbing ways, the character she was portraying. Director Frank Perry later spoke about the extraordinary difficulty of working with her. Co-workers describe her tantrums, her projectile objects, her screaming at makeup artists and lighting technicians, her refusal to film until conditions met standards that were entirely her own. In subsequent productions, the pattern reportedly continued. On Don Juan DeMarco in the 1990s, stories circulated of assistants being publicly humiliated and production grinding to a halt because of her behavior. Her former manager Jay Bernstein once observed that Dunaway didn't just play divas, she became them. The industry eventually responded in the way industries do, quietly. Directors stopped casting her. Projects she was attached to fell apart at the casting stage. By the 2000s and early 2010s, the phone had largely stopped ringing. In 2011, she was fired from a Broadway revival of Tea at 5 before the production even opened, with the producers citing her conduct on set. Dunaway publicly attributed the situation to everyone but herself. Ron Howard has used Dunaway as an example of a specific kind of corrosion, not the violent predation of a Flynn or the systemic exploitation of a Douglas, but the slow poison of ego that refuses to recognize other human beings as worthy of basic dignity. She had a towering gift, Howard has observed. But she used fear as a management tool and left wreckage behind her. The tragedy, in his view, was not just professional but personal, a woman who ended up isolated from the very industry she had spent her life conquering. No figure in the history of Hollywood more perfectly illustrates the gap between public image and private reality than John Wayne. Born Marion Robert Morrison in 1907 in Winterset, Iowa, Wayne became not just a movie star but a symbol, an embodiment of a particular vision of American identity that was tough, self-reliant, straight-talking, and patriotic. Between 1926 and his death in 1979, he appeared in well over 170 films. He won the Academy Award for Best Actor for True Grit in 1969. Generations of American children grew up watching him and understanding instinctively what he was supposed to represent. What he actually believed, however, became impossible to ignore once the evidence was put plainly before the public. In a 1971 interview with Playboy magazine, screenwriter Matt Williams sourced and shared widely in 2019, Wayne made his views explicit and unambiguous. On the subject of racial equality, we can't all of a sudden get down on our knees and turn everything over to the leadership of the blacks. I believe in white supremacy until the blacks are educated to a point of responsibility. I don't believe in giving authority and positions of leadership and judgment to irresponsible people. On the history of the displacement of Native Americans, I don't feel we did wrong in taking this great country away from them. Our so-called stealing of this country from them was just a matter of survival. There were great numbers of people who needed new land, and the Indians were selfishly trying to keep it for themselves. The damning quotes come directly from that interview. Wayne supported white supremacy, referred to gay men with a homophobic slur, and demeaned Native Americans. No context was stripped. These views came out of his mouth the way bullets came out of his six-shooter in his westerns, naturally, comfortably, without apparent hesitation. The controversy was severe enough that Orange County Democratic Party leaders called for the removal of John Wayne's name, statue, and other likenesses from the California airport bearing his name, citing his racist and bigoted statements. For Ron Howard, who studied Wayne's performances closely as a young filmmaker and found real complexity and power in his best work, the tragedy of the man was not simply that he held repugnant views. It was that those views shaped the culture around him while he enjoyed the full protection of his iconic status. On set, his authority was total and could be wielded with cruelty. His America was a vision built on exclusion, on silencing those who challenged the hierarchies he benefited from. He never apologized. He never reconsidered. He died in 1979 still wrapped in the flag, still celebrated as a national hero, while those his ideology had harmed had no equivalent monument built to their suffering.